Welcome to Lake Erie Church's new podcast series called Between Sundays. In this series of the podcast, the desire of our hearts is to help you deepen your relationship with God. So each week, we will have a more in-depth discussion on the sermon message from the previous week. Our objective is to show you how to apply this week's message to your life so that you can live more completely by faith between Sundays. Now, on to the podcast.
Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Between Sundays podcast with Pastor Bill Isaacs. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
And Sherry Capella. And this week, we are unpacking a sermon that you gave us a few weeks ago titled, Once I Was Blind, But Now I See. Yeah. And just to set this up and to give context here, this is, again, we're in the book of John. And this particular message was the message that you gave us that centered on the man that was born blind and the question that we all ask at some point in our life, why is this happening? And so today what I thought we would do is, instead of just going through why is this happening, I thought maybe we'd unpack it a little bit. We would actually reveal how our interpretation of all of the hardships in our lives begin to shape what it is that we actually believe about God, and how God can use even our painful circumstances to open our hearts and reveal His power.
That's good. Let's go.
Good. So the first question, I'm going to set it up here, but the first question I have for you is really encapsulated in this particular point. We don't just experience pain, however, we interpret it, if you really think about it. So my question for you is, how can a wrong interpretation of circumstances quietly distort what we believe about God?
Yeah. So we have a tendency, I think, Sherry, to translate life into, reasons why things happen. And those reasons then try to make sense out of our lives. They make sense out of the things that we're experiencing. So if we say, my foot hurts because I dropped a heavy object on me, then that makes sense to me. I know why that's hurting. But if it's hurting and I don't know why, then the suspicions of what happens begin to take place. Do I have a disease? Is there something really wrong there? Yeah. And then all of a sudden my mind starts going.
Yes.
So you translate into a spiritual context, and what happens a lot of times is bad things happen to good people, and you're like, I don't get this. I don't understand why bad things happen. And I don't know if you recall, but in the message that day, I talked about sometimes things happen because they are the consequence of something we've done. Yep. So, we are broke because we've wasted our money on something that was ill-advised. Or sometimes things happen because they are tests. While we know God doesn't tempt us, we do know that sometimes God permits tests so that He can challenge our faith and cause us to grow in that. And then sometimes we just have to accept that we live in a fallen world. You were talking about that earlier a moment ago. We just live in a fallen world, and sometimes bad things happen, and there's no explanation necessarily for everything that happens. And so the misinterpretation of that can throw you off if you start trying to say, well, then God doesn't love me because I'm in this situation. If there was one thought I could convey to the audience, is that God's love is so eternal, nothing changes that. So no bad situation, no good situation, no calamity, nothing is going to be able to stop the love of God for you. So we have to quit trying to, to interpret everything. Sometimes things just happen, and that's what was happening to the disciples. They kept pressing Jesus. Did this man, is he blind because his parents sinned, or did he sin? And Jesus said, no, it's not. Don't worry about that. Just understand that this occurrence is now opening a door for something bigger to take place.
Yes. Yeah, and we see that as we go through the book. That's so good. The next question. Jesus said this wasn't about sin. It was about revealing God's power. How do we move from asking, why did this happen, to recognizing what might God want to reveal through this?
Yeah. So there's a verse in Isaiah that is so powerful, which says, as the heavens are above the earth, so are my ways above your ways, saith God, my thoughts above your thoughts. And I think we have to give room for the fact that there are always things that God knows that we don't know. There are things that God is aware of, things that God sees coming, that He positions our life for. So if I'm going through a particular situation, it could very well be that God is preparing me for something down the road, and I have to live through this. I have to go on through this experience because there's something bigger that's out there. I remember my youngest son, Jason, who's of course now a minister, pastor, when he was young, he had a hard time in school. We had to have tutors, and we struggled, and it felt like we were never going to get through the experience. And one day he said to me, he said, "Dad, you know," and he called the name of one of his classmates. I said, "Yeah, I know him." He said, "You know what? His mother came and got him out of our math class." I said, "Was he sick?" Oh, he said, "No, not that. That she came and transferred him out of our math class to another math class."
Wow.
And it's like, all of a sudden I thought, okay, God's teaching me something here. Because that's what we all do. When times get hard, we want God to get us out, transfer us out. And we know every one of those verses. Any two shall agree and touch it shall be done. Whatever things you ask in faith, you know. So we want God to get us out. When sometimes God said, "I'm not going to get you out, I'm going to get you through." Because you're going to need this. And what I tried to teach him later, and what I've thought many times about that example, is you need the 8th grade math so you can do the 9th grade math. And if you don't get the 8th grade math, you're going to fail in the 9th grade. And so sometimes God makes you go through the 8th grade. You don't get transferred out. You don't get another option. You got to go through it in order that you can be prepared for what's coming next. Yeah.
So good. How can the Lord make you stronger in the easy stuff? He can't.
No.
The only way that you are refined and made stronger and equipped is through going through the difficult thing and recognizing just how much you need him.
Absolutely. And everything that you and I value about God and our relationship, we learned in the hard times. Very little of what we value about God we learned when things were going well. It's the fact that, you know, when times were hard and we didn't know, your story it has its own unique things, my story does, but you look back and say, you know what I learned in that? I learned God was faithful. I learned that I could make it. I learned I was stronger than I thought, you know, and you learn those things, but you only learn them when you go through the hardest places in life, when you think, I'll never do this, I'll never be able to make it. But you do. And then on the other side, you realize, you know, God was more faithful than I thought. He was more dear to me. He means more to me now than he did because I went through that experience.
Oh, that's so good. Next, actually, this is the last question I have on this one, because this is so good. Everybody, I love this. All right, y'all might want to write this down. Everyone wants a miracle, but nobody wants to need one. Oh, I love that. What if the very thing we're trying to escape is the doorway God is using to reveal himself?
So to be honest and forthright, that statement is one that was made to me by a family member. Everybody in the world wants a miracle. Nobody wants to need one. We don't want to be in a place where we say, God, I got to have a miracle. But we love seeing miracles. We love the stories of the miracles. We love to hear people testify about the miracles. And when you sent me the question to prepare, I thought immediately my mind went to the story of Joseph, who as a young boy was sold by his brothers into slavery because they were jealous of the relationship he had with their father. So he goes down to Egypt. He doesn't see his father for 22 years. He doesn't see any of his family for many years. He lives as a slave in Potiphar's house. He's a prisoner in Pharaoh's jail. And then all of a sudden, the coin flips and he moves into a place of power and position and authority. And then a famine comes into the land that spreads all the way to the homeland of Canaan. And Jacob sends the boys down there to get grain, and not realizing that it's Joseph that has the authority to give them the grain. And the story is remarkable in that they're all reunited. You know, I've thought many times, if you had said to Joseph when he lived in Potiphar's house, what was the worst thing that ever happened to you? He would say, it's got to be when my brothers sold me into slavery. It was the worst thing that could have happened to me because I don't have my father, I don't have my family, whatever. But then after he's lived in Egypt all those years and he's bounced his grandbabies and 2 sons have been born and his dad is there and all the family, if you had said to him, what's the best thing ever happened to you? There's a possibility he would have looked at you and go, I know it's going to sound strange to you, but it was the day my brothers sold me into slavery. Because I think we have a tendency at times to not look beyond the moment and assume that the moment is the biggest thing. When in fact, God may in fact say, listen, this is a small thing compared to what's coming. I mean, I have a very vivid imagination of the story of Joseph, of God saying, just wait.
I know.
This is going to be so good.
Right.
When everybody sees what I already know, it's going to be so good.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that we not let ourselves get bogged down by this moment. This moment is a temporary moment.
Yep,
Paul
it
said
is.
in one of his writings that these temporary things cannot compare with what's coming. And there's a plan of God, a future that God has prepared for your life and my life and everyone that's watching us today that is bigger than this moment. So you can't give up.
You can't.
Because if you give up, you won't get to see it.
Easy thing
You
to do.
won't be able to see everything that God has out. But if you keep going and you just hold into it, you're going to see something that's going to blow your mind, because God's plans are always bigger and better than we ever could imagine.
Than we ever could imagine. And I think that's why it's so essential and so critical that everybody focus on their relationship with the Lord, focus on being in the Word, focus on when trouble comes, you're going to God.
Yes.
And when there isn't any trouble, you've established that relationship and that daily habit of being in Scripture, so that when the trouble's here, it's the first place you go.
Yeah. Building up your strength, building up yourself. What was it the writer said? Building up your faith, your holy faith.
Right.
You know, building yourself up so that you can withstand some of those trials and difficulties. I lived in Louisiana for 6 years, and whenever a hurricane was coming, those people would build up the defenses because they had lived long enough to know what the ferocity of the wind was and what the storms could do. So they would build up the defenses, whether it would be sandbags or whether it be plywood over the windows or some reinforcement to the roof, whatever it was, because they had learned by experience. You got to prepare for the hard times. You got to prepare for the days when you're going to need that. And
it's the same thing here in the spiritual.
That's right. Absolutely. You've got to prepare yourself for the fact that there are going to be days when you're going to need more strength than you think. Absolutely. I totally agree with that. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for joining us on this episode of the Between Sundays podcast. We hope you'll join us for the next episode.